Hello, everyone. Good morning, and welcome to this week's edition of the Wednesday webinar series from OTT.X. I am Eric Hansen from OTT.X, and on behalf of the team at OTT.X, I want to thank all of you for joining us this morning to the series where we bring you insightful, thought-provoking presentations across a broad spectrum of OTT-related topics from thought leaders across our industry. Speaking of thought leaders across our industry, today we're excited to have with us Cory Sher of Whip Media. He's the media industry veteran who has led sales strategies for some of the world's largest entertainment organizations to help them acquire, distribute, and monetize video content. Cory serves as Vice President of Global Sales and Business Development for Whip Media Group in both the US and EMEA. Cory's talk today is going to focus on the insights we can gain by looking at a competitor's library, including licensing, merchandising, and marketing strategies. It's going to focus on how we can analyze competitors by region in order to reveal what the likely content lineup will look like for a new territory. We'll see how knowing what's streaming across all global platforms can give you a competitive edge. Just another reason to pay attention to what's going on in the world of video. Before we begin, I'd be remiss if I didn't also thank Whip Media for participating in our webinar series today. Whip have been great supporters of OTT.X, including many of our events and as active members of discussion sessions and working groups and initiatives. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cory Sher from Whip Media. Cory, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it. Thanks for letting me join you today, the day after a very big day, of course, that's still continuing. So excited to be here and hopefully giving people the opportunity to think about something else other than politics for.
Yeah, take a little break. Let's talk about video.
That's right.
Thanks a lot.
All right, perfect. Well, let me share my screen here and hopefully the technology is working. I'm just going to go to presentation mode. Okay, perfect. Let's let that load. All right, so I want to thank Eric and everybody again from OTT.X for giving us the opportunity today to talk with you a little bit about what we call where in the world data. So how can we help you predict your competitor's next move as you create new streaming content and new libraries in new territories? So we have a lot to talk about, and we'll stop about midway through the presentation so that if you want to ask questions, we can do that. And then, of course, if you have any questions that you don't think of until the end, we'll have an opportunity then as well. But you can always contact me after the presentation, and happy to answer any of your questions. So let's get started and dive in. So just to give you some background on Whip Media Group and who we are as a company, we actually have 3 companies that roll up under the Whip Media Group umbrella. The first company is called MediaMorph, which is our most recognizable brand. MediaMorph, as many of you may know, is responsible for the financial control and management of video content throughout what we call the entertainment ecosystem. In fact, MediaMorph is responsible for about $2 trillion, or about 70% of all video transactional revenue that takes place. So that amount of money flows through MediaMorph every single year. So MediaMorph is an enterprise solution that nearly every Hollywood studio uses, as well as several MVPD players around the globe. The second company that falls under the Whip Media Group umbrella that we'll talk a little bit more about today as well is called TV Time. TV Time is our business to consumer app that over 16 or nearly 16 million users use to both discover and track both movies and television content in over 100 countries. The app is translated into 15 different languages. So whether you're trying to discover content in South Korea, Brazil, or anywhere in Europe, you can do that in your native language. Not only do people track their content and discover the content that they want to watch, but they also can report their sentiment and their emotional engagement to that content that goes beyond just, of course, ratings and what they viewed. So all of that first-party data is collected from the TV Time app, and we provide that into what we call our CVM Insights platform that we'll talk a little bit more later into the presentation. And then the third company that falls under the Whip Media Group umbrella is our metadata source called the TVDB, or the Television Database. It's an open source metadata platform that has over 15,000 contributors that contribute content, both movies and television shows, every single day, making sure that those are all updated and sourced properly. We have over a series of 20 moderators around the world that ensure its accuracy. And not only does that metadata source power the TV Time app with all the context around titling and casting and show synopses, but it also provides that metadata to a lot of companies through our syndicated licensing of our API that's accessible to subscribers around the globe. So those are all products that fall under WIP Media Group, and happy to tell you more about those products offline if you're interested in learning about any of those solutions. But today we're here to talk about direct-to-consumer streaming and how the streaming environment has changed everything, and as buyers and sellers of content, how we need to be more competitive. And really, it starts with understanding what the competition is doing. So currently today, we know that there's hundreds and if not even thousands of streaming services out there. We only know, most of us that work in the industry, of course, know many of these, but to the consumer, they only know the big names like Disney Plus and Netflix and Prime Video. But definitely the consumer is in control of what they're watching, and there's more choices than ever. There's a lot of fragmentation that continues to evolve. So how do you become more competitive as you're building a library of content? But more importantly, what do you know what to buy, and what do you know what to sell or where to sell content to? That's what we're going to really dive in deeper to today. But we know that having the right data definitely changes the game. Without data, as we've seen even outside of our industry throughout the last several months, is key to really understanding the process of how things can be predictive and what the outcomes really can be. So what are those particular data sources that are unique and that are key data inputs at key stages of what we call the licensing journey? So what's happening in each market, and how does your streaming service compare in each of these markets, is really the first key piece of that licensing journey. And in order to get that competitive insight, we at WIP Media partnered with a company called BB out of Argentina, which is the leader in international catalog data around the world. In fact, BB has more than 2,200 platforms that they're currently measuring in over 140 different countries. That is actually just right around the corner, where they'll be that robust in all of those different countries. So having that catalog data and knowing everything that's available on each platform is something that BB can provide, and now that we're providing as a partner of BB throughout the globe. In addition to knowing what catalog is available, they also have insight information, of course, to pricing, whether it's transactional video on demand or other types of video on demand content, and how that differs, again, platform to platform, country to country. Now, combining that with the TV Time data, so taking all that first party data that we're collecting from the TV Time app, from those nearly 16 million users around the country, and going beyond ratings and understanding what the engagement of those users are, or viewers, to content is really key as well. So having the insight to the catalog data, but then combining it with the consumer insight of what people are actually reacting to when they're watching a television show or movie, is where the TV Time data comes in. And that makes it a really unique source, because it can line up, or it can even disagree sometimes with what you would expect in these different territories. That all leads to the future of what we're developing at WIP Media, which is called CVM Demand IQ. And CVM Demand IQ stands for Content Value Management. And then Demand IQ is really going to be a score that's a predictive model based on billions of data points, including transactional data that we're collecting through MediaMorph, combined with the metadata that we get from the TVDB, and more importantly, the engagement data that we're getting from the TV Time app. So this is the future of where we'll be able to see what the real value of content is, and help buyers and sellers know what is the best content to buy, or where they should be selling content to in a future scenario, which definitely includes a predictive score to value that content. We've already started testing this Demand IQ model internally to identify the right titles and maximize performance of those titles. And we're already seeing that the Demand IQ score performed 8 times better than IMDb, 4 times better than box office, and 3 times better than recent releases. So we're happy to tell you more about what Demand IQ is and the future of Demand IQ, and definitely how that's going to play a role in the future of predictive content and what the best value of that content really is. Let's talk a little bit too about TV time and a little bit more about the value of consumer insights and what we mean more specifically about consumer sentiment and how we know that audiences are either engaging with content or they're not engaging with content. Again, getting into what that predictive really looks like so that you can better license and price that content for your future models. So beyond ratings, again, TV time is collecting insight from consumers based on content that they're watching, both movies and television shows, over 230,000 available within the app. And they're reporting their votes based on emotion. They're reporting their engagement based on a score that we've come up with, whether they're sharing memes or writing commentary about a particular piece of content. We're capturing their binge rates, so 4 or more episodes in a 24-hour period. We're looking at their completion rates, which means how many of the available seasons and episodes are they currently watching. So there's a lot of insight that is going beyond ratings and just looking beyond volume. That's really giving us this predictive look, as well as current sentiment around content that you can't capture anywhere else. So again, the utility of the app is to discover, but it's also to discover content, but it's also to report your engagement and your sentiment. And these are the metrics that we're collecting. So when we go back into the streaming catalog data and know what the streaming availability is of content around the globe, this is going to continue to give you basically the titles that are traveling the best from content or from streaming platform to streaming platform, and understanding where the gaps are and how you fill in those gaps accordingly. So applications for buyers and sellers around this data can be used whether you're launching a new service, expanding to a new territory, or surfacing new licensing opportunities in those markets, especially around areas like local content, where there may be gaps to fill there that definitely separates you from the competition. And we'll take a look at that as well just a little bit later in the presentation. So let's start with the BB streaming availability data. And our first analysis when we look at a major platform like Disney+. So how do we predict content choices globally and locally with a major streaming service like Disney+ that's been launched and already proven to be very, very successful in other markets? So we all know that Disney+ has global appeal with popular titles that include Marvel all the way through animation to originals and dramas and comedies, very, very family oriented. But how do those Disney+ catalogs differ, and how do they compare to other territories? Well, we know that Disney+ is about to enter a brand new market, Latin America, in just a couple of weeks. So what can we predict based on other catalogs of Disney+? What will the likely catalog look like in a new territory like Latin America? So we looked and analyzed 13 different territories and over 1,200 unique titles across those territories, including markets like the US, Great Britain, Australia, Canada, France, Germany. And what we found was really, really interesting. About 80% of the titles were very similar when you look at countries 10 through 13. So up to 13 of the same countries had nearly 80% similar content across those countries. So 963 titles that were similar in 10 of the 13 countries. So we know that there's a high probability that that content will likely make its way into future catalogs like in Latin America. Whereas about 11% of the content were in 4 or more countries. So we categorize that content as a mid-tier of what would likely be transforming into other markets, but again, not as great as the top tier. And then in only up to 4 countries, we saw similar content, and that is what we call the bottom tier. So the likelihood that Disney is going to utilize content that's only available in about 4 of their other territories is probably unlikely. But when we get into the 4 or more countries, and then of course, looking at what's available across all 13, we can see that there's 963 titles that are likely to make its way into the new Latin American catalog. So what does that catalog look like today? When we look at the catalog and we see what the high probability of titles are, what is their makeup, we see that there's about 818 movies and about 145 TV shows. But what's really interesting is the most offered genres that make up that 963 titles really again falls into the family, comedy, and animation genres. So not surprising considering that Disney Plus is very focused on those areas or those genres, but it definitely is going to give them a competitive advantage in these new markets, especially when we continue to focus on Latin America. And here's why. When we look at other major platforms like Netflix and Prime Video, we can see that comedy, drama, and action tend to be the most popular, with documentary filtered in there as well. And that's the same across both major platforms. So genres that are likely to be offered by Disney Plus will differentiate themselves against other leading platforms. So we know that, and that's something that you can only gather by really analyzing the catalogs and understanding what the makeup of those catalogs are, and again, how they differ from territory to territory. So when you incorporate, again, the consumer sentiment around content, and we continue that focus on Latin America, how does that line up with what the catalogs are telling us and what the future catalogs are looking like? So going back to the TV time data, we took a look at 3 territories within Latin America. We looked at Mexico, Colombia, and Argentina to understand if consumers were also really interested in this type of content ahead of its debut as a platform in Latin America in the coming weeks. Again, focusing here just on Disney Plus. So one of the things that we can capture in the TV Time app are followers of shows ahead of their debut. So a follower of a show is someone who goes into the app, selects a program that may be recommended to them that has not yet debuted, but has been announced, and they can indicate whether or not they're interested in that particular piece of content by merely just following it. They're then notified when that content is available in that market, and they can begin to track it and report their sentiment, etc. So what we learned was when we looked at Mexico, Colombia, and Argentina, that 5 of the top 5 titles were Disney Plus titles that people were most excited about. And in fact, the bottom 8 to 10 were also Disney Plus titles, all falling under the family and animation genre. So clearly there's a yearn for this type of content in Latin America. So understanding again what the catalogs look like, where the gaps are, and then being able to see if the consumer sentiment lines up with that is all encompassing of how you should really think of your strategy, whether again, you're a buyer or seller of content and you're selling to Disney Plus. That's where the next piece of information really comes in. When we're thinking about it from a seller strategy, we know already that this genre, the genres that Disney Plus is currently offering and what they're likely going to offer in Latin America, and again, what the audience is yearning for, there are still gaps to be filled. So we did another analysis and looked at specifically local content in 5 different territories and compared it between Disney and Netflix. So Disney being in blue and Netflix being in red, with the local content of Disney that's currently available in yellow, and the current local content that's available on Netflix in green. So let's kind of walk through this, this particular chart for a second. So we looked at 5 different territories: the US, the UK, Canada, Germany, and Australia. And if we look at the US to start, there's over 5,000 or 5,500 plus titles that are currently available on Netflix. Of those 5,500 titles, around 2,000 or so of those titles are local content only available in the United States. Same with the UK, where it drops to about 536 local titles available in the UK, and then Canada, Germany, and Australia, so on and so forth. But when we look at Disney again, and we look at what's available currently in the United States, their library consists of about 1,100 current titles, and about 883 of those titles are local content. So that is a really interesting figure, because when you look across to the other territories, the yellow doesn't even show up. And that's what we're also seeing in Latin America. So this is a great opportunity for sellers to be able to understand what content is missing and where you can fill the gaps for a platform like Disney Plus to remain competitive against major platforms like Netflix. So this is clearly an opportunity in these territories to help with the pricing and monetization strategy of this content, but also looking at Latin America, where those gaps are likely also to be filled by Disney Plus as well. So again, having this knowledge and understanding what the catalogs look like is imperative to be able to understand where the gaps are and where those gaps need to be filled. Okay, so I'm going to stop here for just a second, just to see if anyone has any questions up to this point, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper into Paramount Plus as another example as we talk or continue to talk about Latin America. So just want to see if there's any questions up to this point so far.
Yeah, so if you're following along at home, feel free, and please do jump in into the Q&A bin, or just drop a question into the chat if you prefer to do that. We'd love to hear from you, what questions that y'all have. It's interesting. If I understand what you're doing, Cory, you would walk me through this again. So if I've got, I can understand what's on all of these other services, what titles are there, and classify it in terms of the genre that it is. And then I know more about it, like the pricing and things like that. But somehow you're able to predict the engagement of this using the TV time data. And then, or you know the engagement of this, and then you're able to use that to predict what else might be popular. And I'm wondering how deep that goes. Like, you can predict a genre that might be more popular in, let's say, the UK than in Uruguay. But does it get down to like more levels of detail? Like, documentaries are really popular in the UK, but not in Uruguay. They like something completely different. Okay, well, documentaries is a pretty broad category of content. Is there a certain, can we go deeper than that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we can look at every piece of content that's available currently in particular markets. So understanding first off what's available, and then does that line up with what people are actually watching and what they're engaging with. So what TV time does, for example, is a lot of times what broadcasters and what streaming services look at is simply just a view of that content. Netflix, for example, implements a 2-minute rule that says, we will look at, total views based in the first 2 minutes of that piece of content. But you really don't understand what people are gravitating to and what people are really engaged in. And if they know that, they're not sharing that, of course, with the public. So having insight to that particular piece of content and knowing what those libraries look like is the first step. But then understanding what people are engaging with really gives you the competitive advantage to say, if documentaries really are key in Germany, then I ought to be selling more documentaries to those particular platforms than I should be selling dramas or comedies. And as we get a little bit further into the presentation, we've talked a little bit or teased a little bit here about local content, but local content is really important because we know that in the United States, we're a little bit, maybe ethnocentric is not the right word, but our content is really ubiquitous across the world. But there are a lot of territories that we know that people want to see people that are like them in specific pieces of content in those territories. So having insight to know that there needs to be a combination of content that is a mixture of local content, that's a mixture of the types of genres that people are gravitating to your point, is really important. So what we're really trying to say here today is we have the data to show you all of that information so that you can make a better strategic decision on where to sell, and then what content, if you're a buyer, what you should be buying to, to gravitate to the audiences that, or content that will gravitate to the audiences that you want.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm really interested in hearing more. So with that, I don't see any questions right now. Y'all are probably saving them up, but you can drop them in at any point in time, and we'll take questions again at the end of our session. All right, Cory, carry on.
All right, let's continue. Sounds good. Thanks, Eric. So we talked a little bit about Disney Plus, but let's focus on another platform that is set to rebrand itself in early 2021. And that is Paramount Plus. Paramount Plus, as you know, Viacom has one of the most exciting libraries that's out there, content that is hugely popular amongst all viewers, really. Shows like Yellowstone, Killing Eve, The Handmaid's Tale. We all know in the industry, these are the shows that have really driven people to different platforms. But when you're rebranding and transforming an SVOD service like Paramount Plus, you really need to understand what your base is, right? And where you're starting. And then as buyers and sellers of content, where again can we fill in those gaps? So when we focus on Latin America, for example, again, since that's kind of the theme of today's presentation, we can see that currently in Latin America, there's around 254 total titles that are currently available that are coming from this Viacom library ahead of the debut of the rebranding of Paramount Plus. Of those 254 titles, there's about 202 movies and 52 TV shows. But what's really interesting is down here, when we look at this graph down below, the line graph indicates there really hasn't been a lot of new content implemented into this territory in a long time. It's been pretty steady. It's been around the same amount of content over the years. So Viacom, as the slide says, aims to become a bigger player in the global streaming landscape. And in territories like Latin America, what are things that we can predict, or what are things that are likely to happen in that market? So one way to look at that is to look at the US library of CBS All Access and Showtime content and see where currently the focus is and how they can take that focus and implement it into other territories like Latin America. So for example, in the US, currently there are over 1,400 current Viacom titles made up of CBS All Access and Showtime titles. Of those are around a little over 1,000 movies and about 444 TV shows. But again, as you can see the line graph below, there is an influx of new content, especially movies, as we get into the last 2 or 3 years. A little bit more steady state of TV shows, but definitely seeing an increase in both. So new content is definitely going to be key in a lot of these markets. So having the buildup of this content in markets like the US and understanding that is likely going to be a progression when the rebranding takes place later this year, or I should say into early next year. But where else is Paramount Plus likely to be competitive as well? So really understanding the competitive landscape is very, very key, because there's a lot of overlap of Viacom titles amongst other major platforms in these territories. So for example, this is sort of a Venn diagram that shows you the current available titles in Latin America through Netflix, Prime Video, and Paramount Plus. And what we can see is there's an overlap of around 113 titles that are currently overlapping Prime Video titles to Paramount, meaning Viacom titles that are currently available on Prime Video that will likely be available on Paramount Plus. 65 of those titles overlap with Netflix, 11 titles across all three. So what we're noticing here is an opportunity for Paramount Plus to license back titles from Prime Video and Netflix and create more of an exclusive library of their own content that can't be seen anywhere else. And we saw that in particular with Warner Media and HBO Max. We saw Friends go away from Netflix and onto HBO Max. We saw that with Disney Plus when the Marvel titles left Netflix. This is a prime opportunity for Paramount to be able to do the same thing, taking away or hopefully relicensing those titles from these other sources. So again, understanding the strategy or creating the strategy has to be based on what the knowledge is of those other services and where those other titles can come from. Now, combining that with the TV time data is really also really interesting as well, because if we look at Paramount Plus in Latin America and specifically focus on 3 countries like Mexico, Colombia, and Argentina, one of the things that we're also seeing is local content and popularity of local content that's coming from, of course, the CBS and Viacom library. One show in particular, Acapulco Shore, that's available on MTV Latin America is one of those shows that made the top 5 when we looked at a simple ranker in these 3 countries and were able to see, what is the audience really gravitating to. So having a mixture of local content, again, is going to be very, very imperative. And again, being able to get the consumer perspective is really important when thinking about what those libraries are going to look like. Now, down below is affinity, shows that have affinity to the top 5 shows up above. So this is affinity-driven content, including shows like The Expanse, Doom Control, Good Omens. Again, these aren't Viacom titles necessarily, but they're titles that are available on other platforms within Latin America that again give you an idea around genre, around likability of shows, and where again gaps could be filled with content that people are already driving to or driving towards. So having that mixture of local content for Paramount Plus is going to be key again as well. Okay, so that comes to really the end of the data, and really in conclusion of all of those slides is really to give you a basis of how you can really understand your consumers better and how you can differentiate that content with mixtures of local content along with what the current catalogs are doing in other territories. So one thing to think about is when we looked at that other content, looked at catalog content in multiple territories today, one of the things that you can do is combine that again with the consumer behavior to see what people are really gravitating to, and then mimicking that catalog into those territories based on that particular content. However, you really need to understand what the building blocks are of those current catalogs, like we looked at in territories like the US, current territories like Europe, and where the gaps are to fill those content gaps, whether it's local content or other types of genres, are also going to be key. So it's a lot of information, it's a lot of data to look at, but it's really key and imperative to have that competitive analysis. So hopefully that gives you a baseline of what this data can do and the power of the data, both catalog and consumer driven, and then eventually what that'll lead to with an AI machine learning driven demand IQ score that we're also very happy to talk to you about as well after this presentation. So with that, I'm going to stop talking, open it up for more questions or see if there's any other questions that are out there, and happy to answer those.
Thanks a lot, Cory. Yeah, as before, I'd love to hear your questions. Please drop them into the question bin or into the chat if you want to do that as well. You can see how this is really be really valuable as well for timing of titles in terms of promoting them or even maybe releasing them into a new market or even in the US anywhere. You're just seeing what's happening now, what people are watching now. This is a good time to promote this title because of what the data is telling me. Right. So I imagine that folks can really take advantage of that as well. wondering how this might apply to like a brand new library, something that's not live anywhere, and these are titles that no one's ever watched or seen before. And so I'm trying to figure out, like, I've got this new catalog of content or a new service. Let's say it's Eric's. It's no secret, I'm interested in mixology, and so it's probably a great time actually for me to launch my cocktail mixing class. I mean, basically just get vodka in a plastic bottle.
That's right.
But how might I know where and when that this new content would play? Because like Disney doesn't have a lot of mixology. What would I look for? How could I determine something for a new just a whole bunch of new content?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, whether you're a brand new streaming platform or you're an existing major platform like Disney Plus. I mean, Disney Plus, let's talk about that for a second. One of our points on this slide on the very bottom right is react strategically. So you can't react strategically unless you understand what's out there. And Disney Plus, though, it didn't just roll out to every territory and every market at the same time. So they acted very strategically. And they know their consumers, they know who their viewers are, and really figuring out, of those 963 common titles, what will they actually implement? But knowing that there's so much similarity in other markets is really the first step. So if you're starting your mixology channel, you really need to understand what are the other titles on all these other platforms. And again, combining that with the consumer sentiment data, what are people really yearning for? And are they gravitating to animation and comedy? Would they gravitate to mixology? So it's a combination of data sources and understanding what the similarity is between catalogs, but then what is the difference between those catalogs is really important. And then can you fill the gaps with your new streaming service? Mm-hmm. Will you have an audience? Are there other mixology shows on any of these platforms that are doing well? And what are consumers anticipating? So you need to really think about all that before you spend all the money and time in building those catalogs, especially for a new streaming service.
So if you're a new service, you can take advantage of the fact that you're not necessarily blazing the new trail in this space, and learn from what these other services and what the other titles can tell you. It doesn't mean that there isn't room for pioneering, I don't think, in content and titles. But if you pay attention to what's come before, you can avoid some missteps and be able to jump ahead faster. So
no, that's absolutely right. And there's so many black boxes in our industry. Everybody's so protective of their data. Netflix is very protective of their data. Amazon, of course, all of them are. And so having the ability to have this insight is going to be really key. It's one thing to know, again, what the volume looks like of what the most popular shows are. I mean, I can turn on Netflix and here are the top 10 shows that people are watching. Well, that's great, but what are people watching across all platforms? What am I missing out on? So understanding that and starting with the consumer and then having that catalog data, I mean, those are two things that are really very black box for a lot of people that, that can add to any strategy to make it more effective.
Yeah, you talked about sentiment, and I wonder is that something that your data provides, or like if there's a title, and what is the mood or the sentiment of this title? And so okay, I know the genre is documentary, but it's dark. Okay, it's dark, it's depressing, it's whatever it might, dystopian, whatever it might be, and I can see how that's doing in that more nuanced way.
Right. Sentiment is very important. I'm glad you brought that up, because we can look at sentiment not only by show, but by episode. And what we've seen in our data is that shows that tend to be very shocking, very emotional, are shows that generally mean that the storyline is connecting with the consumer. And that is really important, especially when you're thinking about what content to buy, because you want shows that are definitely connecting with the consumer. We don't want to just see shows that make people happy. We've got a bunch of shows out there. That's what a lot of the existing catalog data already has. You want shows that are going to captivate people and keep them emotionally involved. So understanding the sentiment episode by episode is really key. And we capture that. As people watch a show, and they go back into the TD Time app and they're asked, how did that episode make you feel? Did it make you angry? Did it make you confused? Were you bored? These are all things that we have used with our client partners to help make the case even of why a show deserves a second season. So, and it's worked. Studios have used this data to go back to the networks and say, we know that the ratings are average for this show, but there's a storyline here that's connecting with the viewer. This show deserves another season, and it's helped win, a renewal. So sentiment's important.
That's super cool. Yeah, in my case, I guess you could add inebriated.
Inebriated would make people very shocked, I think.
Maybe that's what we all need right now. A little inebriated.
We're not having enough shocked right now with what's happening, right?
All right. So yeah, any other questions or thoughts folks want to jump in? Love to hear from you.
Yeah,
If not, then with that, I guess we'll close it up. Cory, thank you so much for joining us. Really enjoyed your talk today. It's been, as always, great to see you. Actually, this is Cory's second time on the program, so it's fun to have a return guest.
Well, Eric, thank you. It's a pleasure. And one thing I'll just leave is if anybody has any questions and wants to follow up after the presentation, we're here to help. But we want to thank OTT.X for inviting us to join you today, and really appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely terrific. Thanks, Cory. And thanks so much to everybody for jumping on with us today to this edition of the OTT.X Wednesday webinar series. As always, the session was recorded and it's going to be available on the OTT.X YouTube channel and also from the OTT.X website. The PowerPoint presentation is also available to members on our site. And so you can check all that out at OTTX.org. Also remind everybody about the upcoming OTT.X Impact Awards. We want to encourage everybody to participate and be a part of them by submitting your nomination for streaming content that makes a positive impact on the world. Also rapidly approaching our final conference of the year, OTT.X at Pipelines on December 9th and 10th. We put together a tremendous slate of research presentations and analysis. You're not going to want to miss it. You can register for that event on OTT.X.org as well. So head on over there right now and get yourself all registered and scheduled to attend. Thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
When